also for our thesis. Our topic today is political engagement levels in battleground and non-battleground states.
Yes.
Go for it.
All right. So today, instead of giving you a very cut and dry version of my thesis, I'm going to try to take you on the journey of my thesis, kind of following my thought process and how I arrived at the topic. And I did pick this topic because I took a campaigns and election class last semester with my current thesis advisor, Dr. Dina Levy. And this class, we studied battleground states and what living in a battleground state is like, and we read articles on the effects of living in battleground states, and this piqued my interest as well as hers, so we were able to work on this project together. So I am going to talk to you today about the levels of civic engagement in battleground states and the unexpected results I received from my research. I'm going to do that probably several times. So before we get into the project, first I think we need to go over the different terms that I use in the title of my project, the first of which being civic engagement. So what is civic engagement? According to this definition, it is individual and collective actions designed to identify and address issues of public concern. Civic engagement can take many forms, from individual volunteerism to organizational involvement to electoral participation. And I really like this definition of civic engagement because I think it shows how broad civic engagement is, and it really covers a various range of activities. Examples of civic engagement would be being involved in a student government. For parents, it could be being involved in a PTA or a Sports Boosters Association for their children's schools. It could be being involved in a nationwide organization such as the NRA, being involved in volunteer organizations like the Lions Club or Circle K. Individual activities, like just deciding yourself to go and volunteer at a food shelf, would be a form of civic engagement. Also, actions that don't even require you to leave the house, such as choosing to boycott a product just simply by not buying it, or writing a letter to your local representative, senator, something like that, would be civic engagement. And then one of the most basic forms of civic engagement noted here is electoral participation, would be going to the polls on election day and casting your vote. So for this project, I tried to really touch on all of the different aspects of civic engagement to give myself a pretty big picture of it. Next, what is a battleground state? Well, battleground states and what they are is crucial to my research. And a battleground state is a state in which both candidates have a good chance of winning. Battleground states are very competitive, and I think one of the best examples of a battleground state we can think of is Florida in the early 2000s with the Bush-Gore election scandal, where the votes were so close and the machines broke and then it had to be decided by the Supreme Court. So Florida is a very good example of a battleground state. Now, Ohio is another key battleground state, and it has actually voted for the winner of the presidential election in every election since 1960. So Ohio has like a 50-year track record of getting it right. So way to go, Ohio. And then what is a safe state? And a safe state is a state that has a solid chance of going for a particular candidate, and it's not competitive. So New York is definitely a safe state because very strong Democrat state will usually vote for Democrat candidates for the presidential election. So the levels of competitiveness really define whether something is a battleground state or not. So what's the big deal? Well, you can see in this chart here that in this past election in 2012, Obama and Romney literally spent $0 on advertising in New York and California, which are two safe states. But in Ohio and Virginia, they spent over like $150 million on advertising in those two states combined. So that shows that they really do receive a lot more attention from the campaigns as opposed to safe states. Now, if you look at the visits, you can see that Ohio really stands out as having the most visits, which is a characteristic of a battleground state. Virginia has less and is very comparative to New York and California, but I think there needs to be made a distinction between the types of events that were probably held in New York and California and the events that were held in Virginia. New York and California are very big states. They have big cities, which means big donors with lots of money. So a lot of the events that happened in New York and California and the visits they made there were probably more for fundraising purposes than for actual campaigning type events to gain more votes. Now, living in a battleground state is very different from living in New York State. And Dr. Levy, who was my advisor, grew up in Iowa, which is one of the battleground states. And one of the things that she told me personally was that by the time the election cycle was over, they wanted to go back to ads about tractors and pesticides because she was sick of campaign ads. So I have some examples of campaign ads that I'm going to show you. They're short. And I just want you to notice how negative the ads are and think about what kind of effect watching these negative ads during every commercial break would have on you as a voter.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
You work hard, stretch every penny, but chances are you pay a higher tax rate than him. Mitt Romney made $20 million in 2010, but paid only 14% in taxes, probably less than you. Now he has a plan that will give millionaires another tax break and raises taxes on middle-class families by up to $2,000 a year. Mitt Romney's middle-class tax increase. He pays less, you pay more.
Okay. And then just to be politically correct, I have one from the other side as well.
As the economy gets worse, Barack Obama calls on Bill Clinton to help his failing campaign.
It's about which candidate is more likely to return us to full employment.
He's a good soldier, helping his party's president. But what did Bill Clinton say about Barack Obama in 2008?
Give me a break. This whole thing is the biggest fairy tale I've ever seen.
23 million Americans struggling for work.
A middle class falling further behind.
Give me a break.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
Okay. So hopefully you can see the negativity that these ads really embody. And along with seeing these negative ads during every commercial break, all day, every day in the months leading up to elections, there would also be many canvassers in the area going door to door, seeing if you were registered, giving you forms so you could register, offering to give you rides to the polling places on election day. Really a lot of get out the vote measures in battleground states for these elections. Now, scholarly research is undecided about the effect of negative ads, which I showed here, and I'll discuss the effect that I believe negative ads had later in this presentation. So my hypothesis and research, really the core of my presentation. I predicted that residents of battleground states will be more likely to be civically engaged than their safe state counterparts. To research this, I used the 2008 Census Bureau Survey Civic Engagement Supplement. And this was a set of questions that specifically targeted civic engagement, so it was really perfect for my research. And I also like that this survey was from 2008 because it was a presidential election year, so these types of campaign situations would be fresh in the minds of the people that took this survey. I selected two safe states, New York and California. New York particularly because I am from New York and I did want to study this state. And I also picked two swing states, Virginia and Ohio. Now, there is a very big distinction on whether these states are swing states or safe states. Now, New York and California are safe states. New York voted for Obama 63% to only 36% for McCain in 2008. And California was similar, 61% for Obama and 37% for McCain in 2008. And then in Ohio, Virginia, the races were much closer. Ohio went 52% to Obama to 47% for McCain, and then in Virginia, 53% for Obama and 47% for McCain. So you can see the totals, or the percentages in the swing states were much closer and the races were much closer in those states. So they are good examples of battleground states. So why did I predict that people in battleground states would have higher levels of civic engagement? Well, first of all, I thought since they had more exposure to campaigns through advertising and canvassers and all of those things, that voters would be paying more attention. I also thought that since battleground states have more get out the vote measures, people in battleground states, a small group, can really change which way a state will go, that there would be a higher level of efficacy in voters, which we seem to be lacking in safe states, and people are concerned about that. I also thought that because campaigns are more prevalent in battleground states, that citizens would have more opportunities to be involved and have more volunteer opportunities through these campaigns. I also read an article that said that talking about politics leads to recruitment, and I thought that since people in battleground states were being constantly exposed to campaigns and seeing these ads and having canvassers at their door, that they would be more likely to talk about politics and therefore be more likely to be recruited into these types of volunteer positions for campaigns. Now, my results painted a little bit of a different picture for me, surprisingly. So overall, the results that I found from analyzing this survey show that there are inconsistent differences and often no differences between battleground states and safe states. And I'll go through each of the things that I studied individually and talk about those. Oh, wrong way. All right, and we're going to start with what I was talking about before, talking leads to recruitment. How often does a respondent discuss politics with family and friends? Now, there were actually no correlations between battleground states having higher numbers of people talking with their family and friends about politics. Nothing significant. They really seem pretty similar across the board. In some cases, the safe states were actually higher. So this definitely did not support my hypothesis. So even though people in battleground states are being exposed to massive amounts of intense campaigning, they do not seem to be talking about politics more often than people in safe states. The next thing that I studied was non-electoral participation, and this was both in two different forms, either by contacting or visiting a public official, and then either by buying or boycotting a product or service. So there was no huge differences between battleground states and safe states in either of these categories. Ohio does stand out a little bit in the first one in contacting or visiting a public official more frequently than all of the other states. But this is an inconsistent finding because it does not happen in Virginia. So I'm not really able to conclude if that had to do with Ohio being a battleground state or not. This was an interesting category, group participation. There's two facets of group participation. School groups, neighborhood and community organizations being one, and then service or civic associations being the other. Now, this was the only category I found that had actual differences between the safe states and the battleground states in the ways that I expected to happen. And in my opinion, this is actually the furthest question in the survey from politics. So people in these states are actually more involved in the things furthest removed from politics that I studied, which was surprising to me. And I think that this would be a good opportunity for further research to find out why there is this seemingly correlation between battleground states and group participation. You would have to expand the survey a lot more to see if this went beyond just these two battleground states. So the most basic form of civic engagement is voting. And you would think with all these get out to vote measures in battleground states that people would actually be more likely to get out and vote. But it seems that the numbers are fairly similar between battleground states and safe states. And so to look further into this, I looked at why people did not register to vote, or why, if they were registered, they did not go to the polls on election day. And these are my findings on that. Now, if a respondent was registered, the main reasons they chose not to vote seemed pretty consistent throughout the states that I studied. If they were not registered, the main reason why not, there was actually an increase in efficacy as being a reason for Ohio and Virginia. Now, if you're looking at this chart and you're thinking, Chloe, you didn't highlight individual problems in that chart because the numbers do seem pretty different, 17 and 18% to 13 and 12%. Individual problems for this part of my study was a combination of answers that included having a disability, having difficulty with English, or not meeting residency requirements. So even though there was a difference here, I did not think that this difference was relevant to my research because it really didn't get at the reasons why people weren't civically engaged. These people couldn't vote because they were disabled, because they couldn't speak English, or because they hadn't lived in the state long enough to register to vote. Efficacy is a whole different story. Now, efficacy was something that I was concerned about because this year, during the presidential election, I noticed a general sense of apathy with everyone that I came upon here in New York State. And over again I heard, and I felt this way myself, why does my vote matter? We know the state is going to vote for Obama in the end. Why would I even go out to the polls to vote? My vote doesn't matter. And surprisingly, the people in battleground states, where the vote really does matter, it is crucial, felt that way more than people in the safe states, and that's why they chose not to register. So that was extremely surprising to me, why people in those states that are so important to elections actually chose not to register because they didn't think they were important. It seems kind of backwards to me, and definitely went against my original hypothesis. So what was I able to conclude from this study? Well, first I want to talk about advertising. Now, the advertisements I showed you earlier, I think proved that most advertisements in political campaigns are now negative, and campaigns have become increasingly negative over the past decade or so, and there really are a massive amount of attack ads. Scholarly research has shown that negative ads are only helpful because they stand out from the positive programs and ads on television. However, when people in battleground states are constantly being bombarded with negative ads, I feel like these ads probably just started to sound like white noise to them. No one was paying attention to them, and it actually might have demobilized them as opposed to mobilizing them like they had originally thought. There was a study done that showed a set of voters either a positive ad or a negative ad, and after they were shown them, the survey asked them if they were more or less likely to vote after seeing that ad. And when people did see the negative ad, that left a negative feeling with them, and they said they were less likely to vote. So there could have been that type of effect. I was also very surprised by the efficacy levels in battleground states and safe states. And it didn't seem like there was a huge difference between people in battleground states feeling like their vote mattered more than we do here in safe states. I think that if there was to be further research in this area, something that I'm not going to be able to do, I would like to look more at group participation and why those numbers were higher in battleground states. And I would also try to look at states that possibly had early primaries, because this can lead to a lot more advertising, and that could have possibly affect civic engagement in those states. And I would also try to factor in local elections, because I think those could have definitely had an effect on how many people went out to the polls on election day, based on how competitive their local elections were, not just looking at elections on a national level. So in general, I think that there was really no support for my hypothesis in this, which was very surprising to me, and there seems to be little differences between battleground states and safe states. Those are my sources. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts? No? Okay.
Can we have 10 minutes for questions? So,
you said you didn't like the negative ads, but do you think that it would be different if they were positive ads, or it would still just be white noise when it's that repetitive?
I think that if there was a greater mix between negative and positive ads, that would be better. But I think the fact that they've just gone all negative, that would really be a problem. I actually did a presentation earlier today on a Montana Senate election where one candidate had like $1.5 million on positive ad, and the other ones had like practically none, and that candidate wound up winning. And I think that's because his positive ad stood out compared to the negative ones on TV. Yes?
What, if anything, what do you think could be done about people, when they vote, feeling like the vote would matter?
That's a good question, and I think that has a lot to do with the Electoral College, which is something that's so deep into our system that I don't think it will ever change. But the fact that a popular vote doesn't happen And when Bush actually lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College, there was a huge outrage over this, and everyone wanted to get rid of the Electoral College and make it popular vote to make it more fair, but even then it didn't wind up happening. And I think that's one of the ways that it could be helped, but I find it difficult that that would ever actually occur. Yes?
You mentioned that you see a general trend of apathy in these individuals. I was wondering if apathy seems to occur more in any demographic more than others.
For this study, I didn't look at the demographics of the voters. I just looked at them as residents of one state or the other, so I don't know what the demographics of the people who said that they had low levels of efficacy would be, but that certainly would be an interesting topic to look at and would certainly help pinpoint the groups that really need more motivation to get to the polls on election day.
Right, because it seems that certain demographic thought were more apathetic, but then they were to realize that their votes do count and will have great result. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. Perhaps a group that thinks they're not going to count will actually count, but they don't realize that. If you could determine which groups those were, then that could help to motivate those individuals.
Definitely, and I think that you see that in campaigns. You see a lot of people talk about candidates paying particular attention to senior voters because they're more likely to vote. So campaigns actually pay more attention to the issues that have to do with senior citizens and Social Security. But you see them kind of putting, education or college education and stuff off of their agendas because young people are less likely to vote. So I think that if more people started to vote, politicians would pay more attention to them, and vice versa. I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but.
I have a few questions.
Okay.
Did you collect your data, or how did you get your numbers?
I just used the survey. They collected it.
Okay, so you did a second.
So yes, this was like a second analysis of the survey, and I just chopped out all the other states before.
Cool. Thank you all for
Okay.
coming to